Well, welcome to the Alpha Male 2.0 podcast. Here we are again. If you didn't know, I have another podcast called the Sovereign CEO podcast. And that's where we talk about location-independent income, business, Five Flags, international stuff. And that is over at calebjones.com/podcast. If I do this podcast once a week and the other podcast once a week, you might as well get both. And there is actually now a third podcast, but I'm not sure when this podcast actually goes up. So I don't know if this podcast goes up before or after I announce that third podcast. So for the moment, I won't talk about it. And if you're listening to the podcast, I do a video version of this podcast over at the Alpha Male 2.0 YouTube channel, and which we recently just crossed 2,000 subscribers over there. My Sovereign CEO channel is up to about 9,000. And actually I'm up to about 10,000 TikTok followers, kind of crazy. But anyway, if you want to watch this podcast, you can go to alphamale20.com/links, and all of the links to all of the pages are there, including the Alpha Male 2.0 YouTube channel. Today, I'm going to talk about marriage. And if you know my content, you know my opinion on this and my analysis on this. I'm going to kind of talk about the past and then talk about where we are with it today in terms of where marriage is as a society today in the 21st century, in the 2020s, in the collapsing Western civilization in which we find ourselves. So I have said many times, in the 1990s, there were two radical shifts in the modern world. Two things that were the bedrock foundation of the modern world went away in the 1990s. The first of these two things was lifetime employment, and the second of these two things was lifetime marriage. So prior to the 1990s, more or less, you could get a job, and you would stay at that job, or at least stay at that company for the next 35, 40, 45 years and retire, and you'd be okay. That went away in the 90s, permanently. Matter of fact, the early 90s. Matter of fact, my first job was my first full-time job anyway, was in the early 1990s during the great outsourcing recession that everyone has forgotten about. There was actually a recession beginning in the early 90s. And that's when companies figured out that they could offshore a lot of their jobs and spend a lot less money than they were spending in their high tax, high regulation Western countries. This is what happens when you overtax and overregulate companies. They find other options to do the same thing, such as getting cheaper labor in other countries. So lifetime employment went away. Then lifetime marriage went away. During the 70s and 80s, the divorce rate dramatically rose, and it really hit hardcore in the 1990s when baby boomers took over as the generation that ran everything. Everything kind of shifted to the left in the 1990s because of the baby boomers. And so since the 1990s, the concept of lifetime marriage, which used to be a norm in society, went away. And I remember in the 1980s, which was just right before the 90s, I went to school. And when I was a kid in school, there would be a class of like 25, 30 kids. And out of a class of 25, 30 kids in the 80s, when I went to school, and I'm not that old, this is just that recent in our history, you would have like one or two kids whose parents were divorced. One or two, literally out of a class of 30 kids. Today, most of those kids in the class will have divorced parents. If they're remarried or single, doesn't matter. But most of the kids, divorce is now a norm. And so that's the shift that we've had just in my lifetime, which is not that long. I'm 50, which is not super old. It's old, but not super old. And since the advent of my content, even before Alpha Male 2.0, when I was just selling Black Dragon dating stuff, I was talking about this going all the way back to late 2008, why the concept of traditional monogamous marriage no longer works, particularly for men, but it also doesn't work for women either, for many reasons I can enumerate. There's a reason why that the vast majority of divorces, 70 to 80%, depending on the studies you look at, are initiated by the woman. If women loved being married, it would be men initiating divorce, not women, but it's women. And I've said many times, women love getting married. Women hate being married. That is also true with many men. And I can tell you from experience, I have been married twice. I'm on my second marriage, hopefully my last. And that the day you get married, the honeymoon, that event is very wonderful. It's exciting. It's fantastic. Even if you're not into weddings, which I'm not, getting married is really fun. Even for men to a degree, certainly for women, oh my God. And it's not just getting married, it's the engagement, the wedding, the bachelor party, the bachelorette party, the honeymoon, in some cases having that first baby. That's all very exciting stuff. The problem is that's a very tiny sliver of time. Your marriage theoretically is going to last, 40, 50, 60 years. So the first 1% is great, and then the rest is a long, boring slog, particularly if you're monogamous. And when you live in a society where women can do whatever they want, as they should, I'm a minarchist libertarian, women should be allowed to do whatever the hell they want. When you live in a society like that, long-term marriage is going to work. Women are going to leave men because, as I've talked about many times and shown in my content, my books, my vlogs, my videos, women are biologically hardwired to eventually get bored with a sexual male partner, particularly if he's monogamous, and double particularly if he lives with her within 3 years. She's biologically wired to do that. We have the same biological wiring as we had from caveman times, and that's just how women, quote unquote, work. So they work. And you can get very angry about how women are disloyal. Women shouldn't do that. And fine, but that doesn't change science or biology or facts. Sorry. Now, the right-wing argument is marriage is best for society. And that is correct. I agree with the traditional conservatives on this. Man and woman getting married and staying together for many, many decades to raise kids is the best for society. That is true. I agree with that. Here's where I disagree with. I disagree with the concept of monogamy, because even when people weren't getting divorced, people were cheating a lot, particularly men. And and the only reason women didn't cheat as much as men, although they did prior to the 1990s, there were women in the 50s and the 40s and the 1800s and the 1500s and thousands of years ago who were certainly cheating on their husbands. But the reason they didn't do it as often is because they couldn't. They didn't have the opportunity to do that because there were lots of societal and in many cases governmental restrictions around it. And again, if you have a society where it's egalitarian and maybe egalitarian is not the right word, but if you have a society where women are allowed to do whatever they want within the confines of not violating someone else's personal rights, women are going to follow the natural course of human biology and that they're going to leave men. Just like if you live in a society where men can do whatever they want, they're going to follow their natural biology and they're going to have sex with other women. And they do that in several ways based on the culture. In the West, what men do is they cheat on their women. As I've talked about, women leave, men cheat. Men don't like to break up or get divorced. They like to stay with that one, but they like to get some on the side. That is men's biological defaults, what men like. So in the Western world, men cheat. In the Middle East, where I live, the actual, true blue Muslims here have up to 4 wives plus girlfriends. So one guy will be married to multiple wives and have girlfriends on the side. And there's a lot of that in Dubai with the small Muslim population here. But that's men's default, is that they have sex with other women. Women's biological default is to be monogamous, more or less, with one guy, get bored with him, dump his ass, get a new guy, get excited, then get bored, dump his ass, move on, and so on. And this is what I've talked about, how woman's biological sexual default is serial monogamy. One guy at a time, but many guys. Not one guy for the rest of her life. Women were never designed that way. I'm sorry. That's why marriage doesn't work and monogamy doesn't work. Men's biological default is have sex with many women. And as they get older, the model becomes the model that I have pair bond with one special woman. In the alphabetical 2.0 parlance, that'd be an OLTR, girlfriend or wife, okay? But have sex with other women on the side. In my world, that means you have FBs. That is the least bad way to do this. And that's why I have advocated for over 10 years now, the OLTR marriage, which is the least bad and only responsible way to marry a woman in the Western world in the modern era in which we live, where monogamy clearly doesn't work and where divorce is rampant. And when divorce occurs, men get financially screwed. So the OLTR marriage, and if you know my content, you already know this, is identical to standard traditional monogamous marriage in 2 ways. One is it's non-monogamous. You can go hook up with other women whenever you want with very little restrictions, or at least restrictions that you agree to with your wife. You can negotiate with your wife on those house rules. Number 1. Number 2, you have multiple financial, logistical, legal, and international barriers between your money and her money, plus enforceable paperwork that she signs with her own attorney. And that way, if there is a divorce, you don't lose any money. I've said this many times. If Pink Firefly and I got divorced, which I don't want, I'd like to be with her the rest of my life if I can do it, I would lose about $150 in legal fees, and that's it. We'd be divorced within 30 days. There'd be a stamp, and that would be all, because she has signed paperwork a mile high, plus my assets are not in the United States, and she was aware of this. So I would not have to give her any money unless I chose to, which is okay. If a man chooses to help out his ex-wife, that's fine. It's his choice. But no one will force me to give her any money if that ever happens. So if you want to settle down with a woman, in the Western world. You could make arguments for outside the Western world, but even outside the Western world, the divorce rate is skyrocketing. That's the least bad way to do it. Now, the challenge is that this reality of divorce being rampant, people not wanting to stay married the rest of their lives, women divorcing men, cheating, men getting cheating and caught and having all kinds of problems, this is ignored by many segments of the population still. Recently, I saw a clip from the Joe Rogan podcast where Matt Walsh, who is a big traditional right-wing conservative pundit, kind of the same flavor of Ben Shapiro. And there was a clip from the conversation they had, and it was the usual depressing shit when you hear right-wing tradcons talking about marriage. And he was talking about, I think, gay marriage. And he was saying, or Joe was pushing back on why is it bad for gay people to get married. And Matt Walsh said, well, because marriage is about procreation. And that's what people need to do. They need to get married. Matter of fact, just before that, I saw a brief thing of Ben Shapiro being interviewed, and he was saying, men need to grow up and get married. Matter of fact, I did a video on this channel, on my YouTube channel, about Dennis Prager, PragerU, doing a video about how it's important for men to get married. And great if it was 1952. Great if this was the 1800s. Great. Matter of fact, I would be pro traditional monogamous marriage if we lived in those eras, because that was a good move back then. Today, it's insanity. It's literal insanity for a man to get married today. He will just end up divorced, and the woman will take half his money and all of his kids. I mean, that's just how this works. You're asking for future problems when you get into a traditional monogamous marriage today. And to recommend for men to get married, you are denying these facts. But back to the Matt Walsh conversation, Joe was saying, well, what's wrong with gay people getting married? And Matt Walsh basically said, marriage is about procreation. So you need to get married so you can have kids. And so it doesn't count. Gay people can't do it because they can't have kids. And Joe said, well, what about people who choose not to have kids, or older people who can't have kids? And Matt Walsh's answer, amazing how these right-wing conservatives think. His answer was, well, they should. They should have kids. Oh, kill me. So being for traditional monogamous marriage today in the Western world, where the divorce rate is north of 76%, I'll discuss that in a second, and the long-term infidelity rate is north of 77, 78%, I'll get to that in a second, is a fundamentally irrational view. Now, you can say being married and staying married for a long time to raise kids is better for society, and I'm sure I'm going to get that in the comments. I just said earlier that is correct. That is true if it works. It doesn't work anymore. And so the only way in which you can make marriage work is one of two ways. You have the government enforce marriage. You have government force women to marry men and force women to not get divorced. Obviously, I would be completely 100% opposed to that. And if you're for something like that, you are something called an authoritarian, and you are the opposite of me in every respect. The second way is to have it culturally enforced, which is what Jordan Peterson has talked about, where we need to have enforced monogamy. He wasn't talking about government. He was talking about the culture enforcing monogamy. And we did have that in the Western world to some degree. For example, prior to about the 1960s or so, if a woman or a man went into divorce court to divorce his wife, in many cases, I've talked about this, the judge, let's say a guy would come in and say, petition the court, I want to get divorced. The judge would just throw the case out. The judge would say, oh, no, you're not getting divorced. That's wrong. Case dismissed, get back to your wife. And the guy was basically fucked. So yes, you had a cultural enforcement of monogamy, which forced men and women to stay together, but they still cheated like rabid dogs. And as I've mentioned before, one of the really fun things that you can do, and you really can't do this anymore because these people are all dead now, but if you know anyone who is still alive in the greatest generation, the World War II generation, my grandfather's generation, my grandfather passed away a few years ago at age 96. When you talked to old men from that generation, when divorce was like less than 7%, and all the right-wingers said, oh, how great that was that no one was getting divorced, you talked to dudes who were like young men back in the 30s and 40s and 50s, you will not believe how much these guys cheated. These guys cheated like dogs. You saw the show Mad Men, right? That wasn't super inaccurate. My God, these guys would cheat like maniacs. And often if they go off to war and stuff, the women would cheat when they're gone. Everybody cheated on everybody. And matter of fact, there's some data to suggest that they cheated more back then than today because less people are monogamous today, and millennials and Gen Z are having less sex. So just because marriage worked doesn't mean monogamy worked, because it didn't. So culturally, they were enforcing a lie, right? To me, it makes a lot more sense to say, if you want to settle down with someone, great. Why don't you settle down with someone in a way that acknowledges science, facts, biology, and statistics? That's what the OLTR marriage is. The OLTR marriage says you can sleep with other people. You can't date other people. You can't have multiple wives. That's not going to work in the Western world. Sorry, it's not. And guys who have tried this have all failed in the Western world. But you can hook up with other people. Fine, if that's something you want to do. And as I've talked about in many other podcasts and the videos, men will choose to do that, and women will only choose to do that when they're very young. When they're older, they won't want to do it because the ASD rises. The way it goes, I've talked about that ad infinitum in my other content. And there is advantages to this because one of the biggest challenges in marriage, traditional monogamous marriage, and I would know because I had one of those many years ago when I was a younger man, is when the husband wants to go have sex with the wife and the wife says no. What do you do? What are your options? You have none. You don't have any options. You go jerk off to porn like a beta. That's your option. And so when you have an OLTR marriage, that's not an issue. You can just say, okay, and the next day you go hook up with someone else. Not a big deal. So that was a big source of contention in my first marriage. And I know a lot, and I mean a lot, of traditionally monogamous married guys. And this is something they bitch about all the fucking time. And to be fair, sometimes it's swapped. Sometimes the woman wants to have sex and the guy doesn't want to. And then the woman's fucked. And the woman can't do anything other than cheat, maybe. Yes, you could cheat, but then you're living a lie. You're living the life of a thief in the night, and you're always scared that she might find out. I know a lot of men who are married and or live in girlfriends who are monogamous in quotes, but they cheat, and they're constantly worried about getting caught. They have to have multiple phones and multiple email addresses and multiple laptops, and they're always nervous all the time they might get caught. It is not a long-term happy way to live, and I teach long-term happiness. Now, what is hilarious, you'll get things in the pickup artist world and a little bit in the red pill world where they will say things like, well, that won't happen to me. I'm an alpha male. I'm an alpha male. So when I settle down or get married and I'm monogamous, that won't happen to me because I know what I'm doing. I understand women. And this was a common thing back in my pickup artist days. These young guys who had never lived with a woman their entire lives will say, well, that's not going to happen to me. I'm going to game my wife. I'm a pickup artist. I'm going to game my wife so she'll never say no. I'll know exactly what to do to make her say yes. Perfect example of someone saying something about something they've never tried. These guys who've never lived with a woman in their entire lives, and all the guys who've lived with women like, oh, dude, you're a fucking moron. That is not how women work. It isn't going to work. I'm sorry. And that is correct. It's not. If a woman says no, she's going to say no, and that's just the way it goes. There are rare exceptions to the rule, but you get my point. Now, am I against settling down long-term with a woman? Obviously, I'm not, because I'm married. I'm just married correctly. I'm married in a way that reflects the statistical realities of the times and the era in which I live and my own biology and the biology of my wife. So I'm covered on all these bases. I'm married to a woman I love very much. I want to spend the rest of my life with this person. I am more in love with Pink Firefly than I've ever been in love with any other woman in my entire life. Not that I've been in love with a ton of women. I'm an INTJ robot. That list is pretty small, but it's still true. Yet I'm protected. I'm protected against her saying no to sex. That's not a problem. And I'm protected for her threatening, so if you better do what I want, I'm going to take half your money. She can't. So I'm covered either way. It's kind of nice. It's the least bad way to do it. And as I've talked about many times, most men, the vast majority of men, I mean the vast majority, 90% plus, including men who are pickup artists, including men who are alpha males, including men who are players, including men who are red pill, including men who hate women, all these men, okay, including incels, all these guys, 90% of these guys, once they're well over the age of 35, will eventually want to settle down with a woman. Now, when they're 27 or 23 or 32, they say, oh, I'm never going to do that. And every time I hear a guy, I'm never going to get married, it's always a guy under the age of 35. I'm like, dude, just wait. Wait till you're 37, wait till you're 42, wait till you're 45, wait till you're 56. Now, there are men who are 56 who don't want to get married. Yes, those are men who have already been married and just got divorced. And the pain of the divorce is still fresh. It's like, oh, I'm never fucking doing that again. Ah! Yes, you have those. But even those fucking guys, if you watch them and wait a few years, they'll be settled down with someone else. This is normal and natural and human and a biological reality that you as a man will eventually want to settle down. That's why I say you should never get married ever, no matter what. Because a lot of angry red pill guys will say this. They'll take the opposite stance. You should never get married ever, no matter what. You can say that all you want, but 90% of men, when they're over the age of 35, will say, whatever, and they'll settle down with a woman. So it's better to tell men, this is what I've been telling men, If you really want to settle down because you're well over the age of 35, and that's an alpha male 2.0 standard, by the way, you should not move in with a woman until you are 35 years old. If you move in with a woman in a romantic context when you're under 35, you are basically stupid. You're basically asking for all kinds of chaos and problems. You shouldn't even have a girlfriend you don't live with before you're 30. No moving in with anyone until you're 35. But once you're over 35 and you really want to settle down, great. Here's the least bad way in which you do it. OLTR marriage, which means you are non-monogamous. You can hook up with other women whenever you want. You can agree to a few ground rules, but she's cool with that. She understands that. She accepts that. You've dated her for several years under that model, so she's not surprised. You cover that base, and then she has to sign if you get legally married, an enforceable, I'll say that word again, enforceable, I'll say that word a third time, enforceable prenuptial agreement, which are very rare to find in the Western world these days. And you have separate finances both before the marriage and during the marriage, okay? And if you don't get legally married, she signs an enforceable cohabitation agreement where you don't get stuck with things like palimony and things like that, or common law marriage, which is common in many parts of the Western world. You do those two things and now you're covered. Now, is OLTR marriage perfect? Of course not. There's no such thing as a perfect scenario where you move in with a woman. That's not going to happen. That's a fantasy. Doesn't exist. But it is the least bad way to get married or settle down with a woman long-term in the modern era in the Western world. Now, let me go back to the statistics really quick. I have quoted the number of 76% real divorce rate. I could do an entire video on that. I probably should do a podcast on that. I posted some divorce statistics all over my blogs. Basically, the way it works is, as of 2009 or 10, the actual divorce rate, when you mix all the rates together, is somewhere around 76% or so. That is not the per capita divorce rate, which you hear quoted. What you normally hear quoted is 50%. That is the per capita divorce rate. That is a stupid thing to quote because that has nothing to do with your odds of getting divorced. Nothing. Matter of fact, the per capita divorce rate is going down. Why is it going down? Why is the per capita divorce rate going down? Because less people are getting married. A. B, people are waiting longer to get married. So of course the per capita divorce rate gets down. The only rate that matters is the divorce rate of the number of people who get married. What percentage of people who get married eventually get divorced within the first 25 years? And that number is now well over 80% or so. On top of that, the people who never get divorced, what percentage of those people who literally stay married for like 40, 50, 60 years, they never fuck anybody else except their spouse? Wrong. The vast majority, somewhere around 77, 78, 79%, will eventually cheat on their spouse. And here's the weird thing about those statistics. And this is just my extrapolation from the statistics I have seen over the past 15 years. If you have a married couple and someone is cheating and it's been just a few years, it's usually the guy, usually the man who is cheating, which everyone expects. However, when you look at longer marriages, and I promise you, if you think this through with the people you know, this will match the people you know on an anecdotal basis. If you have a marriage of people who've been together a long time, like 7 years, 9 years, 12 years, 15 years or more, and one of the two spouses is cheating, guess which one it usually is? It's the woman. It's the woman cheating, right? So the women who don't leave, those small percentage of women who don't leave a man will just cheat after several years in the marriage. And again, this matches anecdotally with what I've seen. I bet it matches anecdotally with what you've seen. Where long-term married couples, you find out one is cheating, it's the chick, not the guy. The guy, if he cheats, usually does it early on. So anyway, this is a very big topic. That's kind of the overview of where we are. I expect the actual marriage rate to continue to drop as the Western world continues to collapse. And I do expect the number of women leaving men who they live with to also drop as the economy gets worse, because statistics again, when the economy is really good, the divorce rate and the breakup rate is higher. Women feel more comfortable leaving their men. When the economy starts getting bad, women tend to cling to men more, and the number of women who leave their husbands drops, and the number of women who leave their live-in boyfriends also drop, because they go, oh, I hate this guy, I can't stand him, but I don't want to go out there in the world when it's looking pretty bad. I better lay low and stick with this guy until times get better, and then when times get better and the recession ends, women divorce their men again. That's the way it goes. Anyway, this is a big topic. That's the current state of it. And if you want me to discuss this more or in more detail, let me know in the comments. And I will see you in the next podcast next week. Have fun. Bye.